Hello and welcome to Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer. Thank you once again so much for joining me on this journey as we try to learn about all of our guests. Various stories out there. Some of them are stories that were with me. Some of them are stories that people have done on their own. Either way, I'm super, super excited every week to get the opportunity to share anybody else's story, whether it's their story, my story, or a shared story. As everybody has a story with Jeff Seltzer. Last week on the pod, I had John Germain. A lot of great feedback from that. Dave McCann, who I hadn't heard from or seen from in a long time, shot a message saying how much he enjoyed it. It was really great to listen to. What I will say, so last week's episode was about our favorite and least favorite movies of 2024. One movie that I did not have time to mention because it didn't naturally fit in anywhere, but I really wanted to call it out this week, is a movie that came out in 2011 that weirdly I just watched for the first time this past year. So taking a step back real quick on that, back in, it was like 99 or 2000, the movie Final Destination came out. And it was one of my favorite like horror kind of like shocking types of movies because anything can happen. It's bizarre, had Stifler from American Pie. Really, really fun, really enjoyed the first one. I had years ago seen Final Destination 2, which was fine. And then I kind of stopped my Final Destination journey at that point. Recently, my older daughter, Robin, wanted to binge the Final Destination movies, as we tend to do from time to time, various movies and various themes. So we went back and we binged all 5 Final Destinations. First one was as great as I thought it was. Second one was as, let's say, mediocre as I remembered it being. Parts 3 and 4 were very, let's say, they happened. They were there, kind of is what it was. And we eventually watched Final Destination 5. So what I will say is this, even though it came out 13 years ago, and without this binging, I never would have watched it, Final Destination 5 was much better than it should have been. Really enjoyed it. And when I say it was, an older movie, but my first time watching it, it was fun. Largely, I'd say because the first, hour and a half, hour and 40 were fine. But as a huge fan of the first movie, the last 7 minutes of Final Destination 5 just blew me away. The connection to the first movie. Not going to spoil it, even though the movie is 13 years old, but still, with that said, if you've seen Final Destination Part 1, you can definitely skip parts 2, 3, and 4, go straight to Part 5. And the connection, the crossover was super amazing and something I really enjoyed. Blew me away, and days later after watching it, I was still thinking about it. So didn't come out in 2024. It came out almost a decade and a half before, I guess, but definitely watch Part 5 if you've seen Part 1. With that said, I did also want to welcome any new listeners or viewers to the podcast. If this is your first time watching it or listening, thank you so much for joining. Always love to see new people or hear from new people as they find the podcast in various ways, whether it be naturally through Spotify or Apple's algorithms, whether it be through my Instagram page, my occasional LinkedIn posts, word of mouth, or whoever listens to it internationally, as we've had as many as 11 different countries listening or watching it, which is pretty exciting that somebody in Japan and somebody in Australia has seen or heard this podcast. It blows me away how technology works. So thank you so much for that. I would say, as a reminder, we are on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. Shoot me a direct message on Instagram. I'd really appreciate it if this is your first time listening, or if you have any feedback, or if you want to be a future guest, that would be awesome. Love to hear from people, love to hear people's stories, and if there's an opportunity, see what we can do. Also, as a reminder, we can be accessed via email. You can reach out to us at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77 for all things Jeff Seltzer. You can always check me out at jeffseltzer.com. Brief reminder, we are available on all podcast platforms. You can watch us on video via Spotify and YouTube. Audio, we are in those 2 locations, as well as Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Good Pods. Anywhere you can find a podcast. If you want, just go to the old Google machine, type in Jeff Seltzer podcast, and this pops up, which is pretty cool that, without any paid search, this is what pops up. So thank you so much for that. With that said, I did want to welcome to the show this week an old friend of mine, Scott. How are you doing today?
Great, Jeff. Good to see you. Thanks for having me on your show.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining. So for those of you that don't know, Scott and I believe we met about 11 years ago working for a certain cereal and, let's say, active nutrition company in Parsippany, New Jersey. Haven't really connected too much in the last 11 or so years, but I've been obviously following what Scott does via social media. We message every once in a while. So Scott, as always, it is great to see you. For those of you at home that don't know who Scott is, Scott, do you want to give a little 30-second blurb on who is Scott?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, like I said, we met working in the corporate world. Yeah, wow, it's been over a decade ago, and kind of made many journeys in different places. I left the corporate world probably a couple years after you and I separated there in Parsippany, and started my own business working in the healthcare arena. And then recently just sold that after 8 years, successfully exited that business, and kind of on this continued entrepreneur journey. So that's kind of where I am now, and kind of what brings me to your show, your neck of the woods.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing, Scott. Scott basically just gave us a quick synopsis of what this entire podcast is going to be about. So let's take a step back to, I guess, back to 2015, when Scott and I both worked in corporate America together for a certain cereal company. So I've sold many people. I think I've shared my story in various places. Long story short, I worked for Post Cereal, a cereal company that was out of Parsippany, New Jersey. We eventually purchased a smaller cereal company, and usually you would think when that kind of thing happens that you end up getting more responsibility, more things to do, and you end up in a great place. Weirdly, this was almost like a reverse purchase, where we purchased another company, but then they laid all of us off in New Jersey, and the other company that we purchased ended up running the company from a cereal perspective. So definitely weird, but I'd say on the upside, that left people such as myself and people such as Scott and others with, let's say, better than expected packages on the way out. For myself, the additional inflow of cash worked out fairly well. I've been able to, obviously put money towards mortgage, all sorts of different things. Various people that I worked with ended up using the money in different ways. Scott, and if I am saying too much here, please tell me to stop. But my assumption is, with some of the payout, let's say, that we got, you were able to invest in yourself and start your own business. Would that be correct?
Yeah, essentially that's what it allowed me to do. It was a short stint. I left when I left the organization. I took a job over on the other coast. I went to Seattle for 2 years. Worked for a privately owned, fairly large beverage company out there for about 2 years, and it was a very different experience from the corporate world for sure. Learned a lot from a fast-moving, privately owned organization, but realized that we were just too far from our families. That were both of our families were back here on the East Coast. So my wife came to me and said, "Hey, look, I want to be closer. Rose is 5 years old now. I want to be close to my parents." And while we were living in Jersey, we would come up here into New York and visit her parents. And I love the Hudson Valley. So when she said she wanted to move back to the Hudson Valley, I was like, I'm in, whatever, But I also knew I didn't want to get back into the corporate world, and I definitely didn't want to make a commute into the city.
Right.
So I really was like, what do I want to do? And so, interestingly enough, I was at a sales meeting. I went to the news counter to pick up a magazine for the plane ride home, and there was an article. It was fastest growing franchises for $150,000 or less.
Okay.
And I grabbed that magazine right off the shelf. Which kind of luck had it, right? And what I noticed, 6 of the top 10 fastest growing franchises were healthcare organizations, home healthcare specifically. And my background was healthcare prior to working in the CPG area. So I was like, hey, that's interesting, because when you think franchises, you think McDonald's, you think Subway, and I could never see myself like franchising.
Right.
But seeing that, hey, you can get into healthcare franchise, I jumped at the opportunity. And so that whole plane ride from Florida to Seattle, I did all the research on all 6 of these organizations, and kind of landed on what I thought were like the top 2, and really just dove into it. That was July of 2016. By October of that same year, I had a 10-year plan, signed a franchise agreement with one of the home care companies and jumped right in. And in 2017, January 2017, we moved back to New York, where I purchased the rights to 2 territories here in the Hudson Valley, and just kind of jumped in.
Nice. So real quick then, so from a healthcare perspective, you had said that like 6 of the top 10 were healthcare companies. Were they all like service care companies, or kind of like how did they range in terms of like types of healthcare?
They were of the 6 out of the top 10 fastest growing franchises for under $150,000 investment. 6 of those 10 were home care companies.
Okay.
That provided any range of companion care for seniors, all the way up to nursing services for the elderly. So the business that I got into was more on the companion care side, more what I like to call, and how I positioned myself was more of like a seniors concierge service, where we really focus on providing services to seniors to help them age in place, maintain their independence in their homes. Because it's amazing how small little things keep seniors and the elderly, kind of push them out of their homes. So our goal was really to provide the small services, the small things that could help them stay in their homes, whether it's grocery shopping or housekeeping or transportation or just some cognitive support and things like that. And so that's what we did. And I built that business over 8 years.
So is that largely, I mean, it sounds like almost like a concierge service for the elderly. Is that kind of?
Yeah, that's exactly how we positioned ourselves. Exactly. Yeah.
Got it. So again, you said you started that business, you paid into it in 16, you started it, I guess, officially in January of 17. Take me through kind of the mindset. So you said you would put together like a 10-year plan in your mind. So from a 10-year plan perspective, like what did it look like? Did it say like, okay, in terms of we're going to do this in marketing, we're going to do this in terms of getting employees, getting, like things like insurance, like what does that look like?
So it was a 10-year business plan. I would get up before work at 4:00 in the morning. I'd get up and I would spend 2 hours, 2.5 hours working on that plan, starting in July, up until that October point. That's what I would do. I would get up and I would work on that plan. So I laid out a plan. I had really, it started with, I needed to make sure that it was the right financially for me, right? So I built out a 10-year pro forma, how many clients am I going to need in order to to make the revenue that I'm gonna want, and basically saying, okay, with this investment, if I took this investment and put it in the market at a certain rate, so I had to build out what that return was going to be, and so that's what I did. And so it started with really the numbers, the financial piece. And then I worked my way backwards. I say, okay, if I need this many clients, then I'm going to need this many employees. I'm going to need this much marketing then in order to address that. So, and built that out year upon year upon year. The models were there because when you work with a franchise system, you have what's called an FDD, a franchise development document, and they provide that to you, and it has all of the information on a high level of all of their franchises, so you can use that data to build your model. And that's what I did. I used their data to build my model, and they were an organization that had been around for over 20 years, and so you have access to all that data, and that's how I was able to build out the 10-year pro forma, right? And then it's all about putting that plan into place.
Right.
Yeah. So, yes, that's a good question.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing. I guess my follow-up question to that would be, so obviously you did that and you eventually executed the plan. At what point did it feel real? Like, did it feel real? Like, I assume at some point you gave notice to your day job, and at that point you're like, well, I'm all in at this point. Let's see how this goes. Like, is that the point where in your mind you're like, okay, there's no turning back? Or at what point did you say to yourself, wow, I'm doing this. This happened.
Yeah, you'll like this story, Jeff.
Yes.
Because you guys are like the Disney fanatics, right?
Yes.
So we had planned this Disney trip. You have to plan that thing, like a year in advance. At least we have to plan our trips year in advance. So I didn't know all this stuff was going down, when we planned this Disney trip. So I had closed on the franchise agreement. I had signed my franchise agreement in October. We had been looking for a house on the East Coast in between all of this.
Sure.
But I couldn't let my company know,
Of course not.
that I was leaving.
Yeah.
And so the way that the timing had worked, we were closing on the house in December, like December 16th. We had planned our Disney trip to go back to Florida, where my family's from, for Christmas holiday. And we had a Disney trip.
Right.
So we ended up flying into Disney on the 16th or 17th of December. We had the closing on the 18th via conference call.
Oh no.
From the Bath Club Resort, right?
Beach Club?
The Beach Club Resort. And then was at Disney. We flew home, I think it was January 1st. The office was closed until like the 6th or 7th. I came into the office, gave my notice. I gave my notice while I was on vacation. So it was 2 weeks, right?
Right.
And then I went back to the office for a week, packed up the house, and we were in our new house January 19th, 2017. So like all of this stuff was just kind of stacked on itself.
That's a lot at once.
It was pretty stressful time, but also quite invigorating. But to your question, when did it seem real?
Yes.
Yeah, it kind of seemed real when I had to like give that notice at work and was just trying to coordinate everything because I couldn't give the notice too early or else we wouldn't get the mortgage for the home. And so really having to line everything up.
Yeah, that's a lot to process, a lot to digest. Emotionally, it's a bit of a roller coaster, I'm sure. You're doing this Disney vacation, which is, something I'm sure you planned for a long time, as you had said. You're, trying to close on a business, which is also like almost like a once in a lifetime thing. You're trying to make sure that like, obviously your daughter and your wife are having a great time, but at the same time, I'm sure internally you're, so there's some stress going on with everything going on top of giving notice. So lots of emotions, lots of moving parts. So that's pretty crazy. So, okay, at this point, you gave notice to your day job. You officially bought the new company. You just bought a house. There's lots of moving parts. Are you 100% in on the business? Like, is your wife working with you in the business? Does she have a day job? Like, and again, if I ask too many personal questions, just push back.
No.
Just want to get a sense of like, obviously, there are different ways to go into owning a business, right? There's the diversifying where, okay, I'm all in, but my partner isn't. So that way, if something happens here, we're still kind of taken care of. On the flip side, obviously, you limit upside because you're only one of you is working. There's a lot of things going on there. So kind of like take me through whatever you'd like to there.
I was all in, right? So there was no turning back.
Of course,
I knew in my plan, like I knew that I had built out that it would probably be 3 years. It would take me 3 years to get back to what I was making, in the corporate world. That's what was in my plan.
So to that point, then, real quick. So knowing it was 3 years to kind of like get back to what you were making, did you envision that year one you'd be cash flow positive and profitable? Because they say like businesses take X amount of time to get to that point, or did you assume year one, year two was kind of what it was, and year three that's when you're starting to make money, and that's when you were like you were before?
Yeah. So that's it. That was exactly right. Like the way that it was modeled out, I knew that year one, year two, I was going to be taking no salary or minimum salary, right? But because we had the buyout that we had from our previous business, right?
Yes.
I had that cushion. I had that money to work with. So that was all factored in. And then my wife, she was just working part-time. We had, my daughter, she was only 5-6 years old at the time. So my wife was just working part-time. Right. Which actually was really good for me because it allowed me to just pour everything into the business. And, she really, when you say no, she wasn't in the business, but she was in the business because she was managing everything else. You know what I mean? Like everything else, because I was just all in on the business. So, that's just how it worked for us. You know what I mean? Yep. And I think it worked out pretty well. And then funny thing enough is like once I was up and running by 2019, I wasn't back to my exact plan at 3 years. I didn't get back to my original salary. It took a little bit longer.
Sure.
But it allowed Amy to actually start her business. My wife, she started her own business in April of 2019. So we had gotten to that point where things had stabilized enough where she was able to then do what she wanted to do. Right. Yep. So now so by 2019, we were both running our own businesses.
Gotcha. So doing the math, so about 3 years in, you're talking 2019. Obviously, about 4 years in is when the global pandemic hit of COVID, which I could see easily going in either direction based on your business model. During COVID times, you can look at the elderly who were obviously being encouraged to stay home, and so they could use someone who could help them out bringing things back and forth. But on the flip side, there are probably reasons why a business like yours may not do as well during COVID for various reasons. Like once COVID hit, like how did that, I don't want to, obviously you don't want to discount obviously the negatives of COVID, but from a business perspective, a pure business perspective, like did business take off? Did it slow down? Like what did that look like at that point?
Yeah. So very interesting. COVID was actually pretty incredible for me, personally, professionally. I know it was, a challenging time for everybody for sure.
Of course.
But really, I think for me as a business owner and what I realized at that time, when you run into an obstacle like COVID, you're either going to excel or you're going to crack and you're going to disappear. Right. And we really excelled. It made us a better organization. It made us, it made me become more process oriented, really refine those processes. Right. And that really made a big difference. It made us better communicators with our employees. We had weekly meetings, keeping everybody up to date because everybody was scared. Right. And we had to keep them feeling comfortable and making sure that everybody felt comfortable going into their clients' homes, as well as the clients feeling comfortable with our caregivers coming in. So it made us better communicators. It made us better operators, and it made us better financially as well. So it really made us a better organization altogether. As far as financially for us, we took a hit in the very beginning. We contracted about 25% from a revenue perspective. However, that only lasted about 6 months. And then the next year and a half, we grew, a good 45 to 50%.
Wow.
The interesting thing is that we really struggled coming out of COVID and it wasn't because we couldn't bring on clients. We had a hard time because people didn't want to go back to work when when the stimulus checks were really coming in. We were really challenged with getting enough employees to service our clients. So the coming out of COVID really was our struggle was coming out. And again, that also made us better, right? Because we had to become a better employer to attract employees, right? Yep. So in both ends, that whole experience made us a better organization.
Got it. So as mentioned before, like you were basically a full service organization where you would, I guess, help bring things to the elderly, bring things to their houses, things like that. Early COVID, I want to say like Uber Eats and DoorDash and various businesses like that definitely took off. Instacart, where people were able to get things very easily and quickly delivered to their house. Did you find this to be a struggle or a challenge? At this point, you had to kind of find additional differentiation and kind of like show where you guys are different and better than them, or was that not really competitive at all?
No, actually, it really didn't impact us at all because, we are very much, like I said, a concierge type service. So most seniors and the folks that we were working with, the technology and stuff like that, they didn't know how to utilize that technology.
Okay.
Right. So that's where we come in. We're kind of that, we bring a more personalized approach than, a computer or something like that. Like we have people in the homes that are doing the grocery shopping for them, that are doing the cooking for them, that are doing the cleaning for them, that are providing, providing that cognitive support, keeping them from being lonely, things like that. So.
Got it. Did you find that most of your, I guess, points of contact or people who kind of like contracted to you were the people who needed the service, like the elderly in their houses, or family members who were like, hey, grandpa needs help, or my parents need help, something like that? Like, who was the generally, obviously it's all over the place, but who was the one that would reach out to you guys for the assistance?
It's primarily, so here's who it is. I can tell you exactly who it is. And it is, it's a middle-aged woman who has the stress of a full-time job themselves, right?
Yep.
They're taking care of their teenage children, and they've got an aging in-laws, or their parents are aging, and they've got some sort of chronic illness that they're trying to help their parents through, or their in-laws through. And they are completely overwhelmed and stressed out. And that's who usually calls me and says, hey, I need help, help me. And that's where we step in and work with them to understand what their needs are, what their family's needs are, and put together a plan to alleviate that stress and really improve the lives, not only of the aging in-laws, but also that family caregiver who's just overwhelmed, right?
Yep. Did you find that you had any clients that were, let's say, younger? So, I mean, I'm 47, married, 2 kids. Someone like me who's kind of like, hey, I could use help. Like, I need help around the house. I need whatever else like that. Or was it generally more focused on older folks who might have needed like additional kind of like care and attention?
Yeah, it really is geared more towards older folks who need not just somebody to come in and clean their house, but they need somebody who can manage the cooking, the cognitive support, because oftentimes they've got some sort. I would say 75% of our clients had some sort of cognitive impairment, whether it's mild Alzheimer's or dementia, or just memory loss or things like that. And so, if it were just cleaning and cooking, you could hire somebody and it's going to be less, you as a 47-year-old, 50-year-old person, you'd be able to hire somebody much more inexpensively, right? Than our type of service, right?
Right. Makes total sense. Okay. So you ran the business again. We got through COVID, we got post-COVID. As you had alluded to in the beginning of the conversation, at some point you did eventually sell the business. Can you take me through the mindset of, okay, we're out of COVID, we're making some money, we're growing. Like, where's your head at, and kind of like, how do you get to that like end thought?
Yeah. So I had said earlier, I had built a 10-year plan. I kind of went into this business knowing that there was going to be an inflection point at year 10. And the reason why is because the way that the franchise system works is you only have a license for 10 years.
Okay.
And then you have to re-up. And so you pay those franchise fees again after 10 years. So you kind of have to renew your license.
Is it discounted, or is it still the same full price at like that 10 years?
It's the same price,
Gotcha.
right? You just don't have the startup costs.
Yep.
You're going to pay that franchise fee. You're not going to have those startup costs that you had in the beginning, but you're still going to, have a 6-figure fee for the next 10 years, right?
Assuming it hasn't increased since then, because with inflation and such, after 10 years,
correct.
I'd imagine 150 could easily become 200 or 200 plus at that point.
Right. So I knew going in, that the 10-year, at that 10-year mark, there's going to be some inflection point. I'm going to need to make a decision. I'm going to either, continue on, or I'm going to do something else. So that's why I had a 10-year plan.
Yep.
So I got into, the 8th year, and, there's lots of things, this healthcare world, as you all know, right? It's very dynamic. And for me, it's a small business operating here in New York, workman's comp, you've got your taxes, you've got your unemployment taxes, looking out, there were going to be lots of challenges on the horizon, some headwinds coming.
Okay.
So I had an opportunity to exit 2 years earlier than my plan. And it was an easy exit, fairly easy exit. And it was a hard decision, but at the same time, an easy decision, if that makes any sense.
It does. So when you say exit, I assume somehow there was either a buyer or somebody showed up who was like,
Yeah.
"Hey, you have a business. I want that business. Here's X amount of money to buy your business." Is that kind of how it worked?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I had I have neighboring franchisees. That's why it made it easy. They were
Yep.
other that were in the same system that I was in, and I had an opportunity to sell the business to them, which made it really easy because they didn't have to get vetted by the system,
Right.
and they knew the business, and I was able to work with them and transition my clients, transition my employees, and it really made it very smooth and it for everybody who was involved.
Yeah, it sounds like best case scenario where you're not trying to your point, vet new people. You're not trying to explain to people what the business is. You have people who've been in the business for years that just want to expand their footprint, basically, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. Yep. So
Did you, without getting into the numbers, did you end up, I guess, positive in terms of your sale? Was it kind of a neutral deal? Like, did it end up in a good spot for you? Let's say.
yeah. So like if you think about a 10-year investment, right? What
Yep.
you would do with that money over a 10-year period, what your hopes would be, right? If you had it in the stock market or something like
Sure.
that. And what I would say is, I did better than had I invested in the market over the
Okay.
last 10 years, right?
Yep.
Am I able to retire? No. Do I have a little bit of runway to figure out what's the next project that I want to get involved in? Yeah, I have a little bit of runway. Am I gonna own a $300 million super yacht? No.
Maybe one day.
I might get a new car.
Okay. Well, that's nice. That's progress, right? That's good.
Yeah. No. So yeah, that's kind of where we are.
Awesome. So again, you sell the business. Now at this point, you're walking away. You've been working. You've invested your time, your effort, your family into it for a number of years. You walk away with some money, and then Scott decides, I'm going to do what? Like, what is next for Scott after you sell your business?
So I closed on the business in August, so it really hasn't been that long.
Okay.
I'm really still trying to figure out what that next thing is. But
Right.
what's really amazing, and I think anybody who has kind of run a business or been in the corporate world, and then you have this break, your brain just kind of like just a lot of things start coming to your head, a lot of
Right.
ideas, a lot of different. You have a lot more time, and so what I've just been doing is, hey, anytime anything comes up in my head, like, oh, I'm like, okay, let's go explore this. Let's go see what this is about. Why, why is this coming into my head, and why don't I just go explore it and see what happens with it? So
Right.
that's kind of the journey that I've been on. Is just I've been doing a lot of reading, been doing a lot of writing, really been exploring. I took up journaling about a year and a half ago. So I've been writing a lot more and just exploring a lot of those kind of personal things. And then getting into more kind of like passion, just trying to explore different passion projects.
Right. Nice. So to that point, you just mentioned journaling, which was interesting to me because you and I had talked a few weeks ago about this, and you also were generous enough to send me something in the mail. So I did receive something that's available via your website called Our Journal. So first, before we talk about Our Journal, can you plug your website? I want to make sure we get it out there properly.
I'm sorry, say again.
Can you plug your website? So what is your website address?
Oh, it's just Scott-Teresi.com.
Okay.
So Our Journal is a passion project. That it was something that came up probably like a few weeks after I had sold the business. I'll tell the story, a little personal story, but I've been married for 22 years. About early on when I got married, I think it's a big change for you when you have a partner. So we had some communication challenges, early on in our marriage. It was probably within the first 3 years. So we went to counseling, And in that counseling, one of the things that our counselor had us do was one of the challenges that we had when we were.
Okay, Scott, I think your Wi-Fi is coming in and out a little bit. I lost you there for a second.
I get very, very emotional. I think we got lost here.
Yeah, Scott, I lost your Wi-Fi there for a second.
Back, Jeff?
Are you, I can hear you. You've got a still face right now. Can you hear me? Okay, you appear to be frozen at this point. So while we're waiting to get Scott back, I'll just talk real quick about it. So again, our journal, which is available at scott-teresi.com. It's really cool. I haven't actually utilized it yet, but I've read through it. It seems like a really cool way to communicate with your partner, a friend, or anybody else like that in terms of making sure you're on the same page. And it makes communicating and sharing how you're feeling and what you're going through a lot simpler, because obviously oftentimes communication can be weird for different people. Not all of us were raised in environments where communication is easy. So this helps to, it's a great tool that helps to, bridge the gap in communication challenges, let's say. Scott, are you back? Can I see or hear you? We've still not got Scott. So I'm going to keep talking through this. You are there. Okay. Yep. Continue, please.
I'm here. Yeah. Okay. So, you were kind of breaking up there.
Yep. So, Scott, last I heard from you was you were talking about how you've been married for 22 years. About 3 years in, you recognized there were some possibly communication challenges. You went to counseling, and at that point, that's where we kind of lost you there. So if you want to continue your story at that point.
Yeah. So what one of the counselors had us do was, whenever we were having some challenges with our communication, whether it be they got too emotional or things like that, she had us write in a spiral notebook, like how we were feeling or what we needed to communicate to our partner. And so we started to do that, and we did that for about 6 weeks or so, and it really worked. It kind of separated the emotion from the reaction that we would have. So anyway, back in the summer, I found that we were kind of having these communication challenges again. And so I was reflecting back on the exercise. And me being me, I couldn't just break out the old spiral notebook. Like, I had to put a process around this communication tool. And that's when, and I had been journaling. So this idea of, hey, why don't I create a partner's journal, or now what I call our journal, where it's a book that allows us to better communicate with one another. So the idea is to connect, share, and grow. And so within this journal, the idea is that you would use it on a weekly basis. We use it usually on Sundays. Like I will write in, there's two main prompts every week that you fill out. One is, hey, what's your week look like? The second one is basically, hey, how can I support you? Any stresses or big meetings or anything that's coming up. And then the third prompt changes every week. And that's the connection piece, where it kind of, the different prompt every week kind of reflects on it. Just has you write about different, memories or good things that you want to relive or things like that. And so the idea is I write in it, and then the book kind of flips over, and then my wife writes in the other section. And then as I'm planning my week, I'll open this up and I'll look at, okay, well, what is it that she's got going on, and how can we kind of coordinate our calendars? We also have conversations about it too, but having the journal kind of allows us to kind of open up a little bit more. And so I started to just share it with a couple people, because I thought if it added value to us, maybe it will add value to other people. And I got really positive responses. So I found a publisher and just printed it, and then put it up on the website, and figure if it adds value to somebody and improves their communication and their ability to connect with their partner, great. So that's where it came about.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that, Scott. And again, for anybody interested, it's available at scott-teresi.com. That's Scott with two T's Teresi, TERESI.com. So this is super helpful. Again, like I said, I'm going to definitely dig into it a little bit more, see if it's something that's applicable in my house. Everyone can communicate in a better way, and this definitely helps to facilitate that in terms of getting us all to that sweet spot, I guess. So With that said, Scott, obviously this has been a pleasure talking to you. Always happy to see an old friend. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about or plug before we end for the week?
No, I appreciate it, Jeff. This was a lot of fun. Glad I got to catch up with you and enjoyed kind of reliving that whole experience. So thank
Awesome.
you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Scott. So with that said, everybody, once again, I want to thank you all for joining. All the feedback I've gotten has been really, really great. Really appreciate it. Keep it coming. Specifically, you can reach out at Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. As a reminder, my personal Instagram is at Seltzer77. You can check out jeffseltzer.com for all things Jeff Seltzer. If you want to sponsor the show, if you want to send me anything, you can email the show at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. As a reminder, there'll be one more show this year before we go on a brief hiatus. Next week will be a best of show in a very non-traditional way. It's not going to be just clips because that would be too much work. Instead, I'm going to go through a list of the top 10 streamed episodes for the year, give some behind the scenes stories and how they came about, some additional information, probably whip out some data and some information about how the show is done. We recently hit a really cool milestone for the podcast, which I'll talk about next week as well. And probably, talking about any last minute like holiday plans, stuff like that. So with that said, once again, please tell your friends, your family, your family's friends, your friends' families, all about this show. We're available again on all podcast platforms, video on Spotify and YouTube, audio in those two locations, and everywhere else. So with that said, thank you all so much, and we'll talk again next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.